that is research methods, relatively a very factual unit. Okay, but some part of it will actually help us get acknowledged to some terminologies. Okay, and plus the methods that we are using. Plus why I'm dealing with this unit earlier, because a lot of examples means we just cannot write all the examples of say particular methodologies like interview, field work, case study method, and all such kind of methodologies that we use for conducting research in anthropology. But when we'll be starting with just after this, when we'll be starting with paper 2, we'll be studying multiple scholars of Indian anthropology, and we will be finding the examples of these methods in the methods that have been used by the Indian scholars conducting research in India. Okay, now आपको अलग से कोई effort लगाने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी. You will be spared of that effort. You can just write that this can be quoted in interview method, this can be quoted in case study method, and so on and so forth. Because what I have observed from my personal experience in mains, that quoting Indian examples in paper 1 and paper 2. Paper 2 definitely is Indian anthropology only, but paper 1 also can fetch you some extra marks. Okay, rather than quoting, because ultimately you need to understand the purpose, that is UPSC for India. Okay, and that's why it's always better to connect any kind of idea that you're giving with respect to India. And majority of the syllabus or majority of the things that we're reading in paper 1 basically are done by some foreign scholars. But if you have understood it, and if you're using these ideas and explaining these ideas in context to the research that has been done in India, it will always be very much helpful and might get us some extra 1.5 marks for every question that we attempt. Plus extra edge हो जाएगा हमारे आंसर में, कुछ uniqueness होगी. Okay, so most of the times we look for some unique case studies. यहाँ पे effort cannot be made in order to look for some unique example, unique case studies. But how to make your answer unique is to apply it in the context of India in paper 1. Okay, that can actually help you score somewhat better. So that's why we are reading this unit first. Another statutory wording लिखना बहुत पड़ेगा इसमें. Okay, because things are more or less dealt in the theories. I'll be explaining some basic ideas and then I'll be dictating the notes more or less. Okay, so let's start with research methods. Also talking about the importance of this unit, every year 10-15 marks questions are coming, a 10 mark question or a 15 mark question every year. Okay, so research methods. Now today we'll see, say when we started with anthropology, so we always had the aim to actually find out or theory making. Okay, so in order to understand cultures and then to give some theories that will be a generalized idea of culture all across the world. Now there are two major approaches of theorization that is followed in anthropology. Now this is the first topic, approaches towards theorization. The first approach is inductive approach or inductive method of theorization, and the second one is deductive method of theorization. So with respect to inductive, we all have heard this, have we have discussed this. So inductive actually is an approach moving from specific to general, while just opposite, deductive is approach moving from general to specific. For example, inductive is like all swans, say some swans are white, then the next day some other swans are white, and then finally based on 3 days 4 days of observation we just can conclude that all swans are white. So some specific cases that we saw, and based on that we gave a general idea about the swans, that all the swans are white. So this is what is called as inductive method. So here there will be some general steps of say some inductive method. The first one is observation. You observe and then some data is collected by that observation. First one. Second is analyzation. The data is then analyzed. So you collect some data, you analyze that data or classify some data, and then generalization. Collect data, analyze data, and then out of that analysis, just generalize, come up with a general idea. So this is what actually is inductive method. So the theory that is coming up is basically out of the collected data. Okay. Now, इसके बाद एक fourth step is there. That is what is called as iterative process. That you collect more data to refine your general idea. The general idea will be more and more refined, more and more precise as you collect more and more data. Now in deductive method, the things are different. We start with a general theory or start with a general hypothesis. Okay. Theorization or hypothesis. Then second one is, so you have a general perception, general idea, you want to just check it. Okay. So that second one is testing the hypothesis. So you basically have a theory, you basically have a hypothesis, you basically go for testing of that hypothesis. Okay. That means you predict that if my hypothesis is correct, that in that case, this society, this particular phenomenon will happen if my hypothesis is correct. And then you experiment. That means you made a prediction based on your hypothesis. अगर ये बात सही है तो ऐसा होना चाहिए. And then in order to check it, you basically conduct some experiments, you gather some data, you put it in that hypothesis and check whether this is happening or not. Okay. And finally, rejection or acceptance of hypothesis. Okay. Say if the prediction after the experiment is verified, you accept that hypothesis, or else you reject the hypothesis, reformulate the hypothesis, again test it, again conduct the experiment, and then the process goes on. That is how the inductive and deductive method actually works. The first one is basically collecting the data and observing theories out of it after the analysis of data. And second one is like having a theory, having an assumption, and then testing that assumptions or theories. Okay, so these are the two major approaches towards theorization that is followed in anthropology. Okay, specific to general and general to specific. Now, which of the one do you think is more correct? Sorry, deductive. Inductive is more correct. So you basically have the data, then you come up with a particular. Now, but inductive, is a flaw here, that it is not allowing the testing of the hypothesis. Okay, here it is allowing the testing of the hypothesis and it has the provision for rejection of the hypothesis and then to start the process altogether again. So now, which of the one do you think is correct? Refining it, not to test it, because the theory has already come from the data. They are not testing it; they are refining it. Made. हो ही नहीं सकता ना. Once a theory has come out of the data, how that the next data will be at crossroad with the existing theory that has already emerged out of the data? You will refine it. You will add some provision. These are the exceptional cases. These are some say in this situation this might happen. So you are broadening the theory rather than rejecting it altogether. What happens? Say so once the theory is created, you are then broadening the scope of it rather than rejecting or testing it. हाँ, अब बताइए कौन सा बेहतर लग रहा है? Deductive again? Sorry, inductive से आप deductive or you are confused actually. Both of the approaches they have their own limitations. Okay, they have their basically. So can you give the example of inductive approaches? Means say the studies done by this approach. Sorry, Boas proposed this. Boas suggested that this is what should be followed. But tell me anybody who did this. Sorry, Malinowski. Yes, Malinowski study of Tobrianders. That was inductive approach. Some general idea. Sorry, study from specific. That is studied the Tobrianders and gave a general idea out of it. Okay, so that's a inductive approach. And can you give me this deductive approach? Sorry, the first one, that is evolutionists. They were deductives because they had a general idea that every society will pass through the same stages of evolution in a unilinear fashion. Classical evolutionism आप लोगों का Saturday को test भी है. So I believe you should be at least aware of these definitions. नहीं तो ये 5 दिन तो बहुत कम है. Okay, so these are some of the approaches, and now we'll see the criticism of this. But before that, just like inductive approach. What is the difference between testing and experiment? So testing का मतलब होता है कि that you are basically creating a question or a prediction. That if this theory is correct, then a particular prediction will hold true. And then in order to check the theory is correct or not, you conduct an experiment. Okay, but testing में basically you are making some predictions that if A is happening, then B will definitely happen. Okay, something like that. That's right. Inductive approach. Inductive method is a fundamental approach. An anthropological study that involves gathering empirical data. And generating theories. Or explanations based on those data or observations. Theories or explanation based on those data or observations. Next point. It is characterized by following features. First, observation or data collection. Right? Anthropologists use inductive method and engage in collection of empirical data and detailed studies. Second, data analysis. Anthropologists look for patterns, themes and relationships. Among the data collected. They use this regularities, that is some pattern, some theme, to give a theory or a general idea. Okay, third one, theory generation. Anthropologists develop generalization that explains the observed social phenomena. Fourth one, iterative process. That is, they collect more data to refine theories and broaden its scope. Okay, you can write, for example, Franz Boas, and I'm not explaining all this. We have, means depending upon if the question is of a greater marks, so you can actually use this idea of Franz Boas' idea. And then second, Malinowski's study of Tobrianders. Okay, right? Deductive methods is a research approach. Used in anthropological study that involves testing hypothesis or theories through empirical observation. It is often contrasted with inductive method, which generates theories based on specific empirical data. Okay, key features, just right? Key features. First one, theory formation. Right? Anthropologists begin with Anthropologists begin with a theory, or a hypothesis, that they seek to test or confirm. Okay, basically they might come up with that material condition affects culture. Say that is the hypothesis. Now they want to check it. Second one, hypothesis testing. Researchers develop research questions, or prediction that can be empirically tested. Third one, data collection and experimentation. Anthropologists engage in data collection activities and use this data to test the hypothesis. Okay, last one. Acceptance or rejection of hypothesis. Right? Collected data is analyzed to confirm. Collected data is analyzed to determine whether it confirms or refutes the hypothesis. Okay, right? Example: Marvin Harris, Levi Strauss, binary opposites. The hypothesis and हर जगह पे finding those binary opposites. Okay, Levi Strauss, Margaret Mead. Okay, now let's see the limitations of this approach. So what is the first limitation of inductive method? The first one is subjectivity and bias. Okay, so for example, here there will be bias in data collection, on researchers bias. So basically up data collection karna hai, and then you have to come up with a theory. Now that data collection comes with a bias that what researcher considers to be most important will be considered to be relevant data, and the researcher what it considered not to be important will not be considered relevant data. Okay, so for example, inductivity is just like if I send all of you to a particular society just to see what that society is, will you all be writing same data about that society? No, you will write what you think is important, and then I ask you to make a theory. So you will, based on the data that you collected, which you thought was important, a theory will be created out of it. So basically it is representing the biasness of the researcher, because there is no particular, but in case of deductive, this bias will not be there. Another kind of bias will be there, but this bias will not be there because you basically have a hypothesis, say whether material condition or material condition related to the culture of a society. Now you are basically writing and seeing the material condition, then you are seeing the culture of society and then trying to correlate it. So वहाँ पे आपको पता है कि आपको material condition देखना है and you have to see some basic aspects of the culture. But here you don't have any kind of hypothesis, you do not have any kind of the framework. You record what you think is important. So that is the subjectivity and the bias in data collection. Just like this. Inductive method heavily relies on researchers' interpretation, collection, and analysis of data. The data collected is heavily determined by what researchers consider to be important. Okay. Second one, data overload. Now it's simple, specific to general. How many studies you need to do in order to come to a general idea? It might lead to overloading of the data. Okay, कि आप collect किए जा रहे हो, but at what time you need to generalize? It sometimes might lead to data overloading. Just like this, data overload. That inductive method often involves collecting vast amount of qualitative data, which can lead to data overload. Next one, it's related to it, time taking and costly. And last one, can sometimes lead to time taking and costly. Last one, can sometimes lead to, मतलब इसके आगे वाला है criticism. It's not explanation of this. इसमें time taking and costly not to be explained anything. Next one, that is, it can sometimes lead to hasty generalization. Okay, so overall, if you want to say criticize this inductive, you don't have to remember anything. Just remember the criticism of Malinowski's functionalism and historical particularism of Franz Boas. Everything is validating. Okay, so just use that logic. अब रट्टा मारने नहीं बैठ जाएंगे कि inductive criticism ये है. Just understand this approach, and then you can use the criticism of Malinowski and historical particularism here, and that will be enough for your answer. Okay, so all you need to remember one thing: inductive is nothing but specific to general. I remember it just with this acronym, and मेरे लिए काफी है ISG. That is it. Inductive, specific, general. That's it. Okay, and rest of it I can elaborate in the exam. Only I need to remember कि ये वाली approach बोआ और Malinowski follow करते हैं. अब इतना पता है तो बोआ का याद है, Malinowski याद है. I can just elaborate 200 to 300 word, any number of words in the exam if I just remember these things. Okay, so next, criticism of deductive approach. Here there is another kind of bias. That bias is called as confirmation bias. Here bias is in data collection. Here the bias is of a confirmation bias. That means only that data will be collected that actually confirms with the existing theory. Because you have that hypothesis, now you will be collecting the data that which actually accepts or actually validates your hypothesis. That might also happen. For example, Margaret Mead, if you remember, was criticized that only that data was collected which basically confirmed her hypothesis. Or even Ruth Benedict was also criticized for that. She actually rejected any kind of conflicting elements in the Zuni's. Okay, so Zunis was presented with an Apollonian genius, and she actually was found that any kind of conflict that was present in Zunis was rejected by her. That was not mentioned in her book, The Patterns of Culture. If you remember that this was the book written by her, and Zuni was the society. Okay, so that is the confirmation bias. Just like this, researchers seek evidence that confirms their preconceived hypothesis. Evidence that confirms their preconceived hypothesis while neglecting or downplaying any contradictory evidences. It compromises the objectivity and validity. Of research findings. Okay. Next one is just an extension of this. The problem of reductionism or determinism approach. So what actually happens is that deductive methods, it will be giving a theory and it will trying to overgeneralize or trying to understand any kind of complex social phenomena with a general theoretical understanding that will be valid all across the world. Okay, that is what is called as reductionist. So some complex phenomena will be oversimplified with a single simple theory that ye hai. So whatever they are doing. So for example, deductive method by Marvin Harris. So cannibalism क्यों है? क्योंकि प्रोटीन की शॉर्टेज है. Sacred cow, why sacred cow? Because agriculture is there, that's why sacred cow. So all such enough. So basically, if you see that a very complex phenomenon, because India is not only the country where there is marginal farming. There are a lot of countries in South Asia where marginal farming is there. Why not sacred cow say emerged there? Why only in India? Okay. Plus, India was not that marginalized in the ancient times. So there was a lot of prosperity. The marginal farming was not that important. Okay. Then why there was no that kind of class stratification? So that is why it basically leads to what is called as reductionist approach. Any complex phenomena might be explained by an oversimplified theory. Just like this. Deductive method can lead to a reductionist approach. In which complex cultural phenomena are simplified and explained through predefined hypothesis. It is often said that this deductive method creates text without context. Okay, so this context is absent in the deductive theories, because whenever you're trying to generalize any kind of idea, you basically consider that there is one general theory that will be valid all across a particular, so all across the world, all across the societies across the world. So here, some act which might be contextual in that society only, some act that might be contextual in particular society or with respect to a particular individual, that context is gone when seen from a general lens. That whatever everybody is doing is basically seen from a general lens, a general idea, then the context of that act is gone. So for example, if I say that why marriage are celebrated, so you have culture materialist idea that infrastructure, structure and superstructure. Now the context is gone. Suppose if I love my daughter a lot, okay, and since my love for my daughter is immense, I want to give her all the luxuries in the life. And based on that, I had a dream that whenever she gets married, I will basically have a very lavish, a very kind of celebratory marriage. I have planned it. Okay, now that cannot be explained only by a single theory of culture materialism. I don't bother whether my act is basically benefiting the infrastructure or even if it is harming the infrastructure. I don't care, because my love for my daughter is intense, and that's why I'll celebrate her marriage. So the infrastructure might not be, my place might be suffering from some kind of drought, my place might be suffering from some kind of water shortage or food shortage, whatever. But since I'll do all the philanthropy act, that's another thing. But since my love for my daughter is immense, I will celebrate each and every moment in her life, and that's why I'll spend. Now, how can it be explained by a theory of culture materialism? Is my act basically thinking about the infrastructure? No. Now, that can be a case of a person who might not be that rich, yet the love for the children is so immense that he'll take some loan, he'll take some debt, and then he'll think that I'll pay later on, but let my daughter, my son should have a very luxurious life, isn't it? Now, the context is important, and all the context, if you try to generalize by a theory, that context is gone. Okay, so that's why this deductive approach basically has a very limited emphasis on the context. Moreover, it actually reduces the participant involvement. Okay, so here, when you are basically generalizing an idea or having a general theory, in that case, whosoever be the participant, whosoever be the actor, उसको तो आपने subtract कर दिया, क्योंकि उसके बारे में कोई बात ही नहीं हो रही है. Irrespective of whatever whosoever is there, he will act in that same manner. So that participant involvement is rejected, neglected. Okay, so that is, the context is absent, just like this. Yes, can be there, but the thing is, here when you collect the data, अगर आप data collect कर रहे हो, वहां से theory आ रही है, so in that case you are not in the first place discounting the role of the participant. Okay, when you find the similar pattern irrespective of the participant, then you come up with a particular theory. Okay, अब हो सकता है that in some cases you will find that there will be variability because participant को आपने अभी already discount नहीं किया, so that will be reflected in the theory also. Okay, so just like this. Deductive approach neglects the cultural and the historical context cultural and historical context of cultural phenomena. It may overlook the significance of cultural meanings, social dynamics, and historical aspects that shaped a particular cultural phenomena. Okay, next point. Deductive method traditionally positions the researcher as an external observer. And may not emphasize on the meaning given to a phenomena by the participant. Okay, so these are the two major approaches of theorization: inductive, that is moving from specific to general, and deductive, that is moving from general to specific. Okay, and their respective limitations. Now here comes that the scientific approach. Okay, say I'm just talking about the scientific approach just to give you an idea, and then we'll be talking about the scientific approach once at the end of the syllabus. Okay, when we have covered all the units, and then there will be unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, that is anthropology, meaning, scope, and development of anthropology. That is the first unit. So once we have covered entire anthropology, then it makes more sense to understand the meaning of anthropology and the scope of anthropology, because whatever we have read is the scope itself. Okay, and the meaning of anthropology will be more clearer to you, and development of anthropology we have seen through theories and all. Okay, and then its relationship with other disciplines. Okay, that we'll also cover in the syllabus, and then we'll summarize it. That its relationship with psychology, culture personality school, its relationship with sociology, its relationship with medical sciences, that we'll be seeing in physical anthropology and all. Okay, and last, that is the nature of anthropology. So nature, there is one major question related to nature of anthropology, whether anthropology is a science or not. Okay, now that question came, I have already discussed this, that question was very much relevant, say when the anthropology as a discipline was emerging in the middle 19th century, 1850s and 1860s, when anthropology, say 1865, primitive culture by Tyler. Okay, so at that point of time, this kind of questions makes more sense, because it was a time of Renaissance or post-Renaissance, wherein science emerged as a replacement of religion. Okay, so anything that was scientific was given more respect, rather than something that is opinionated, something that can be testable, something that is based on empirical knowledge, something that is having universality, say India ho chahe America ho, validity hai uski, rather than society to society. So that kind of knowledge will be more credible compared to the knowledge which actually is subjective in nature. So such kind of value system, objectivity, universality, empirical science or empiricism, such kind of experimentation, testability, falsifiability, and that became more and more prevalent. And now the scientists, or say anthropologists, they try to project the image of anthropology as a science of culture, which actually can deal or can create some laws, can create some kind of theories that will be valid all across the cultures. Okay, but the problem came was that later on, postmodernism, say 1950s, it also emerged, and it started to criticize science itself. The question that came was, is science a science in itself? आप anthropology की तो बात छोड़ दो. What you're calling the science, whether it is science in itself or not. Okay, so there are different scholars who were talking about that science in itself is not a science, let alone anthropology की तो बात दूर की बात है. Because majority, for example, there is a scholar named as Paul Fairbairn. We'll discuss about these scholars. So he says that the majority of the scientific discoveries were accidental or serendipity. You must have heard about, say, beautiful accidents. Okay, so Kekulé, basically he was actually talking about, say, when talking about benzene, and उसने रात में एक सपना देखा that there is a snake around a fire ring. Okay, and he thought, उसने सुबह उठ के structure बना दिया. This is how he talked about this is the benzene structure, and valid हो गया. So now this was not something that was experimentally done. It was basically a beautiful accident, and that turned out to be, or say, Schrodinger equation. You must have heard about, say, for all those who have prepared for IIT JEE 11, 12. So that was the biggest toughest equation that we had to remember, and that equation was not created by some kind of experimentation, some kind of data or something like that. Schrodinger, he was having an intimate relation with his girlfriend. He was actually puzzled about that formula. All of a sudden, he had some thought. He left his girlfriend on the bed. He wrote the formula. Get back to the bed. Okay, and then the very next morning, when he analyzed, he saw that the equation is complete. Ramanujan, he created several doctrines. Okay, several theorems without any proof. He just says that this is equal to this. Now, one very interesting theorem is that sum of number 1 to infinity is equal to minus 1 by 12. He gave that number. And when he said this to his colleagues somewhere in Britain, they laughed at him. That because it is against the basic nature of the numbers that sum of the positive numbers will always be positive. How can it be a negative number? Then he says that it is what I feel. And then this number means जब सारी equation fail कर रहे थे, so then they say, I think in some scientific project, maybe in Large Hadron Collider or some other places. Now this idea of Ramanujan, they applied this number wherein the sum had to be put and the equation gets entirely solved. Proof is not there. Proof is still not there. How you can actually say that the sum of 1 to infinity is minus 1 by 12. But in various cases it actually becomes valid. वो equation solve होती है. Equations they give. So and then he always used to say that कि एक देवी आती है and there is a devi in my mind and she basically gives me and I just write it on the diary. Many theorems they got proved, means but that took a lot of time. And many theorems they basically are still in that stage wherein the scholars they are working upon it and they might be coming up with some proofs of it. Okay, now this is Paul Fairbairn saying that how science was developed, how these theorems or these laws of motion or any kind of things, they were not created in some kind of experimental setting where objectivity is 100% ensured, but in itself they were created based on some accidents. Though science in itself is not science. Okay, then there are feminist critique of science. So feminist critique of science say that there are the science is sexist in nature. Okay, science basically is sexist because you basically have to be a male in order to be a scientist or a scientific scholar. So you must have seen Nobel Prize winner. So बहुत famous photo है of Nobel Prize winners, say Einstein and then that Bohr's and several other scholars basically sitting together. So it's said to be the most intelligent minds of the world. Now, one woman, Marie Curie, okay, got the Nobel Prize. And out of that, all the science awards they were given to men, and not even now also you're finding that majority of the science awards are taken away by the men only. So feminists say that science is sexist in nature, and when it says that it is male dominant, that means it cannot be 100% objective. Anything that favors the male will be considered to be more scientific as compared to the one that does not favor the male, because they are the one who are in power. So for example, there was a woman, and I just cannot pronounce her name. You cannot also, don't tell me. So the thing is, she wrote a letter to Darwin, okay, and Darwin, he replied, Mr. Blackwell. Okay, when in the reply of the letter, he wrote, Mr. Blackwell, I can think, something like that. So what he wrote is not important. What prefix he used was important, because he never assumed that he कोई female ऐसा letter लिख सकती है, and that's why he automatically assumed that this letter would be from a male itself, and based on that he addressed that person as a Mr., thinking that he automatically अब bias है कि अगर कोई बंदा आया है, किसी का लेटर आया है that is talking about the theory of evolution, survival of the fittest, it automatically has to be a male only. It cannot be a female who is that much knowledgeable. That was the bias that he has. Okay, in fact, in Darwin's Descent of Man, that is the basic book that he published in which he talks about the evolution or origin of species, he himself has said that the evolution actually nature has actually favored the superiority of man over women, and it is through natural evolution that men have become superior over women. इससे पहले भी और during the time of Darwin, also they talk about a theory that is active sperm and passive egg theory. That is, sperm is more important for giving some kind of characteristic to the offspring compared to the egg. Active sperm and passive egg theory. Okay, or what is also called as spermism. That is, sperm was considered to be more important, and as we'll see, evolutionary theories will talk about it. So sperm was considered to be very much important as a component compared to the woman, or say the contribution by female. So 1900, 1920s, and later on, we got to know about the chromosomes, egg and ova and all. But before that, in 1900, the scientific knowledge was based on male dominance, and not ये हमें कोई data से ये knowledge आई. It was the societal perception of male superiority which was actually translated into the scientific knowledge. So science in itself was not a science, and that's why science is experiencing what Thomas Kuhn says paradigm shifts. Okay, there's a scholar, Thomas Kuhn. He gave the idea of paradigm shifts in the science. That means entire narrative will be rejected altogether. What is considered to be scientific today, next day it will be rejected. Entire shift in the paradigms will be there. And then the very next day you will find something other, which will be another paradigm in the science, another paradigm in the science, and so on and so forth. Physics has experienced multiple paradigms: Aristotelian physics, Galilean physics, Newtonian physics, Einsteinian physics, and quantum physics. Okay, maybe later on we might have another kind of paradigm shift in physics, or what we consider true today based on the science. So just like any kind of social knowledge is changing with time, in the same way science is also changing with time. So if the knowledge is based on experimentation, complete objectivity, why does the science experience paradigm shift? So the question on the nature of science itself is there, and that's why that race for being called as a science is no more relevant right now. Okay, very important that there was a debate, some are saying that this is science, this is not a science, this is humanities, and so on and so forth. But that race was important because science had a reputation in the hierarchy of the subjects or a hierarchy of the discipline. Science was considered to be at the topmost hierarchy because what time ka context mein science ki value thi. But right now science is also questioned that science in itself is not a science. Then there is no sense of actually debating whether anthropology is a science or not, because science credentials mein there are certain question marks. Are you getting this? So we'll be talking about more researches and more ideas, and then we'll be having more examples in anthropology also, wherein you'll find that science ko taak pe rakh ke idea diya gaya, and that was considered to be one of the valid ideas. We'll be talking about, for example, when we see physical anthropology, the genetics wala part, so DNA structure. So who discovered DNA structure? We actually know that Crick, Watson, and one more scholar. So they all got Nobel Prize. Then, but the real discoverer of that DNA structure was Rosalind Franklin. She was the one whose photograph was used, but nowhere in the speeches of the Nobel Prize recipients, nowhere in the nomination, Franklin's name was there. But the photograph that they used was the one that was created by Rosalind Franklin, who was working on the same project in the same laboratory, Marwick, I think, or Maxwell something. This was the name, third person. So who basically got the Nobel Prize, but unka naam hi nahi tha. She was not given a credit. In fact, she was bad-mouthed by Watson. Okay, so in that case, science was also sexist in nature. And if you remember, Michel Foucault, knowledge is power, and knowledge is created by the ones who are at the helms of power. Okay, so they create knowledge, and that kind of knowledge is basically to maintain their position. So automatically, so we'll be talking about all these things just to give you a brief idea that we are anthropological methodologies or methods were designed or designated with a reason, that is to make the subject more and more scientific in nature. So that the data is collected in a scientific manner, the research is done in a scientific manner, and the theories that come up, they are considered to be scientific or have more validity and respect in the general discourse. Okay, now let's see the major theoretical strands. In research methodology, major theoretical strand in research methodology. So here we'll be talking about two major theoretical strands. First one is macro or structural strands, and the second one is micro or individualistic strands. Okay. Now basically macro or structural basically consider structures to be over and above the individuals. Okay, culture structures to be over and above the individual. So individuals are considered to be the passive recipients of the culture. They follow the culture as it directs their action. So they do not have their own consciousness, but they are working according to the collective consciousness of the culture. Everybody behaves similarly, everybody acts similarly. So that is the collective consciousness. So individual consciousness nahi hoti, individual ki call nahi hoti, but there is a collective call of the culture. Okay, now that is what is called as macro, and this macro will try to, since individual is not a very prominent variable in the culture, it will try to give a general idea of the culture, and that creates a strand called as positivism. Okay, so positivism, if you remember when we discussed in the very first lecture itself, Comte, Auguste Comte. So he mentioned three major stages of evolution. So theological stage, the metaphysical stage, and the third one, the positive stage or the scientific stage. Okay. So positivism is a term that was coined by Comte and Spencer. Okay, they were the initial positivists. So they said that any social phenomena or any social activity can be understood by general laws, or can, so they are empirical in nature, just like any kind of law that is applicable on any kind of material phenomena. In the same way, societies also function according to certain laws, or social behaviors also happen based on certain laws. ऐसे random नहीं होते. Social behaviors are not random. Social behaviors are not something that is variable from person to person, but they follow certain laws. And that's why the aim of the social researchers is to discover those laws that can explain all the social behaviors. And based on that, they thought that all the social behaviors that can be explained by law. And that's why a stream developed what is called as positivism. ये एक generalization करने की कोशिश करें. A general theories that has to be given to explain all the social behaviors happening in and around us, rather than considering each and every social behavior as individualistic or maybe variable from person to person. No, but a general theory to explain it all. That is the positivist approach. Now we have seen the two major types of positivist approach just now: inductive and deductive, because they all aim to create theories. One पहले data collect करके theory लाना चाहता था, the other one was theory and data collection to test it. Okay, but both of them, they had the final aim of generation of theories, and they are the approaches under positivism who actually wants to explain any phenomena around the world or any cultural social phenomena around the world through a general law or universally applicable law. And when I'm saying that there is a universally applicable law for all the social phenomena, that means individual की कोई discretion ही नहीं है. Do you have any discretion then? If there is a law, for example, there is a law of motion. So you throw this object, you throw a ball, you throw this, or you throw anything, it will follow the law of motion or not? Does the matter has any discretion there? No. क्या ball फेंक रहे हो या आप ये फेंक रहे हो? No. The law of motion that is there will be applicable to each one of them, right? And that's on the basis of the same logic. The positivists say that there is no individual discretion, but the laws that are applicable to or that are used to explain the social phenomena will be applicable to every individual. No discretion. There is the society or the structure. They basically occupy a realm over and above the individual who constitute it. So individuals are merely the passive robots of the culture or the society. They do not have any discretion. So that is the case of positivism. Clear? So that is a macro level idea. Okay. Now we'll see the micro, but first write this macro approach. Macro approach regards structure, social structure and culture. Social structure and culture superior to individuals. It overlooks the meanings. Individuals attach to a social institution. Right? Positivism assumes that society or culture is governed by laws. These laws determine how individuals think and act. It emphasizes upon the use of empirical observation and scientific methods to study and understand the social world. Positivists seek to discover objective universal laws governing a social phenomena. And they prioritize quantitative data, objectivity, and value-free research. Quantitative data, objectivity, and value-free research. Next point. Positivists believe that social phenomena can be studied in a similar way to natural phenomena. In order to uncover universal laws and regularities that govern human behavior. Right? Key features. First one, empiricism. Empiricism is a theory that all knowledge is based on experience derived from the senses. All knowledge is based on experience derived from the senses. It places strong emphasis on empirical evidences. So just I just forgot to mention this. So what is empiricism? You just need to understand one thing. That it simply says that anything that you can feel by any five senses, anything, say by vision, by say sound, or by smell, by taste, or by touch. So the five senses, whatever data that you can see, अगर आप किसी चीज को देख सकते हो या किसी चीज को feel कर सकते हो by any of your senses, that means that is a phenomena which has a law. So if you're seeing the society, if you're seeing the structure, if you're seeing the cultural behavior, if you can see this, if you can feel this, that means there is some law behind it. So just like if you're seeing the laws of motion, okay, in the same way you can actually see a society functional. आप society को देख रहे हो that there is a society that is functioning with an order. There is some kind of coordination or collaboration. Just like a law, there is a law of motion, there will be a law of society as well. So just try to find out the observable data or empirical data. क्योंकि जो भी चीज आप फील कर रहे हो उसका कोई ना कोई law है. ये empiricism बोलता है. Okay, so nothing in this nature is random. Anything. There is a law behind everything. So even if a society is functioning, there is a law behind it. All you need to discover is those laws, and that is what is empiricism. दुनिया में कुछ भी random नहीं. This is what they want to say. Okay, next one. Sorry, intangible aspects as if. जैसे, you give me the example, then I can better counter it. मतलब as a positivist. So time लेके आपको intangible aspects. Any intangible aspect that you might be thinking that cannot be visualized, and then family relations you cannot. Father and son, you cannot visualize this. एक पूरी movie बन गई यार अभी कल परसों रिलीज हुई है. हाँ, you don't see how a father behaves with respect to his son. You do not hear the dialogue between father and son. Okay, the words that they use, the language that they speak. Okay, so that's अपने personal experience यहाँ पे नहीं बताने हैं. Okay, so the thing is, आप पूरी movie उस पे दिखा दी, तो मतलब इतने बड़े बड़े बजट की movie है, परसों रिलीज हुई. You must have heard about that animal. Father son relation पे तो movie बना दी उस भाई ने. Okay, so empiricism. The second one is scientific method. Scientific method. Right? Positivist adopt scientific methods as primary means of studying social phenomena. Adopt scientific methods as primary means of studying social phenomena. This involves formulation of hypothesis, systematic data collection, rigorous testing, and generation of theories based on empirical evidences, not objective, empirical evidences. So these steps cannot be in the same order. It can be in different orders. So first they can go for data collection, then formulate a hypothesis. They can first formulate a hypothesis, then they can go for data collection. Either way. So that will actually define two ways: the inductive and the deductive method of generating the theories. Okay. So next one, objectivity and value neutrality. So what is the meaning of objectivity? Sorry, based on facts. Okay, yes, it's correct. That is based on certain facts, or you can say that there is no place for individuals' emotion in this kind of research. Okay, what you feel, what somebody else feels, or what the native feels, what the researcher feels. No, there is some kind of objectivity. Okay, that means no preconceived notion, no emotions, no person-to-person subjectivity. Say so, subjectivity मतलब क्या होता है कि person-to-person opinions आप include कर रहे हो, or you are including the opinions of the people, and that will vary from person to person, place to place, culture to culture, society to society. But objectivity is irrespective of the person, and value-free means that none of the value is basically determining your research or governing your research. It's completely free of any value. So whether it is politically correct, whether it's politically incorrect, whether it is right, whether it's wrong, doesn't matter. It is projecting the society in a particular manner, doesn't matter. What is value free? It should be value free. No bias, no particular value को दिमाग में रखते हुए आप research को modify कर दोगे. That is might present a society in a very bad manner. Okay, no, that's not the objective of the research. The objective of the research is to find the data, find the theory. Whether the society that is talked about is presented in a good, bad, or whatever manner doesn't matter. Okay, that is value free. Most of the time, what actually happens is even in the scientific researches right now, they are not objective and value free. Because some data that might come, for example, we'll be seeing in paper 1 only, physical anthropology, that is the nature-nurture debate with respect to intelligence. So some say that nature is biologically hard, so intelligence is biologically hardwired. मतलब आपकी genes determine करते हैं कि आप intelligent होगे या नहीं होगे. And the second one is saying that nurture is determining the say your intelligence. So nature side, you must have heard your parents saying that कि आप गधे को जितना मर्जी ट्रेन कर लो घोड़ा नहीं बना पाओगे, because उसके अंदर गधे के genes हैं. Okay, so he will always be some people remembering the childhood days. Okay, so you must have heard such kind of dialogue that is completely based on nature side, saying that कि गधे के अंदर गधे वाले genes हैं, and that's why to blame this poor animal. So what actually happens is that आप उसको ऑक्सफोर्ड में भेज दो तो कहाँ उसको घोड़ा बना दोगे. This is what our parents used to say. So they are emphasizing upon the genes only, saying that कि आपकी biology or the product that you have, say the biological hardware that you have, basically will determine your intelligence. And now what actually happens? Suppose if I say that biological say genes determine the intelligence, आज के time पे it will create some kind of discrimination. A genetic discrimination would start. Okay, and that would actually be seen. Say suppose if you actually create a profile in the matrimony.com or some kind of .coms. So here they might ask for your genetic testing, asking that I want to screen your this gene. I want whether you have this version of a gene or what is the quality of your gene with respect to intelligence, so that I can determine whether my children will be intelligent or not. Now अब genetic compatibility के basis पे शादी होने लग जाएगी. And that's why even if research actually talks about the genetic component playing a very important role in the intelligence, they will never publish it, or that will never be accepted by the society, because that will create a new strand of discrimination. A genetic discrimination thing will happen. Okay, are you getting this? And that's why बहुत सारी scientific research they basically try to be politically correct at that point of time. Or we can say that it's influenced by the political ideologies prevailing at that particular time. They cannot challenge the political ideologies, because if they, then the scientist की जो career है वो तो खत्म होगी. So that means science in itself is determined by the political context, and that is how the theories were determined. But here they say that science is something that is value free. Completely value neutrality should be there. No particular value should be emphasized or ignored. Whatever is the research that should be presented in its own context, nothing of that sort, whether it is politically correct or incorrect, doesn't matter. Okay, so बहुत सारे cases में what happens is कि some kind of researchers will come up, say representing Indians, with respect to some kind of poor genes in some aspects, while very good genes with respect to some aspects. Now, Indians will be selective. So all those genes that are presenting us in some good manner will be accepting or celebrating that research. But the other one that is presenting us in a very bad manner will be rejected. For example, I can tell you one example, that is COVID case. Indians were projected as a better survivor with respect to COVID compared to the people of European origin, isn't it? And there was a research, we'll be seeing about that research, Neanderthals. So Europeans, they owe their origin from Neanderthals. Some genes of Neanderthals are present in the Europeans that makes them more vulnerable and more mortal with respect to COVID. And India में एक logic था कि बचपन में नाली से बॉल उठाते थे और ये सब करते थे, पता नहीं क्या, but that was not that scientific. But projecting us as more stronger compared to the Europeans because of the Neanderthal genes that they have, and we do not have it. Okay, and we celebrated that. But another research comes up and then basically projects that Indians are more genetically morbid with respect to heart fatality. So we have certain heart genes or genes related to heart that basically makes us more vulnerable towards heart death or say cardiac failure. Abhi recently you must have heard about several news coming up. Randomly deaths are happening, and that too in middle aged people, not say heart or say diabetes earlier. We used to consider it as a elder age disease, say 60s के बाद किसी को heart attack आ गया or something like that. 50s के बाद people are experiencing. Now we are experiencing the cases of middle aged people from 20 to 40 experiencing heart attack or cardiac arrest. Okay, now certain researchers they have said that there are certain genes that makes us more vulnerable, and almost all over India, around 33% of the population they have that variant of the gene that makes them more vulnerable to heart disease. Now that was very much criticized. Sample size क्या है, कैसे आपने research कर दी, कहाँ से research कराया, पता नहीं, all that stuff. They are it's a propaganda of medicine companies, medical companies just to sell their products and so on and so forth. Okay, ये diagnostic company वालों का propaganda है ताकि सब जाके टेस्ट कराएं, and इसको बहुत ज़्यादा favorably accept नहीं किया गया. Now both of them, they basically were talking about Indians. The one basically which was giving Indians as a superpower, projecting Indians as having super genes, that was accepted. The other was basically criticized much, and the scientific criteria were basically mentioned by the Indian scholars about that. Okay, so that is value neutrality. Okay, just like this. Positivist strive for objectivity, and value neutrality, in their research. They argue that the researchers should set aside their personal beliefs, and biases and values, personal belief and biases and values, to ensure that their findings are not influenced by subjective interpretations. Okay, now we'll see the limitation of this macro approach. Macro में ही positivist approach है, basically trying to come up with a law of culture or society that will determine your behavior. नहीं, macro basically एक structure का idea बताता है जिसका एक approach आती है positivist, मतलब एक ही approach है positivism, that is macro में आता है. Basically इसका macro का basic idea क्या है कि structure dominates your behavior. Okay, and since structure is dominating your behavior, that means there is some basic law that is determining each and everybody's behavior. आपको कोई अपनी खुद की कोई agency नहीं है. You do not have any kind of discretionary authority actually to decide what you will act or how you will act. There is some law. That is what they want to discover, positivism. Okay, macro के understanding में one approach to study the society is positivism, trying to understand the universal laws. Okay, now let's see the criticism of it. The first major criticism is again subjectivities and the values. Now, although they say that it should be objective, it should be value free or value neutrality should be there, but we have seen in postmodernism only because ultimately the research is done by a human. So human cannot be completely free from all the emotions, all the socializations. We can never act without emotions. We can never act because whatever we are the result of a particular kind of socialization, isn't it? And that socialization has made us what we do. Any kind of thought, any kind of impulse that will come in our mind will definitely be based on our past experiences only. So the way you think, the way you act, the way you perceive a particular phenomena completely depends upon your past socialization, your enculturation, okay, and your experiences. How is it possible that you can completely become objective? You can completely take away. It's just like you acting as a robot. There's खुद के कोई emotions नहीं. There is some program that has been put in your mind. You act according to that program. Even a robot also is basically working according to some kind of program that is put there. He also, that machine can also not be completely bias free. Okay, because when he will be going for analysis of a data, there is some kind of pattern that he will try to emphasize more rather than ignoring. क्योंकि हम pattern खोजना चाह रहे हैं तो we will create some pattern at some point of time. We will never accept that there is no pattern at all. There is no regularity at all. That there is so much of uniqueness, so much of individuality that we cannot create a general pattern, general theory. हम इस चीज को accept नहीं कर पा रहे because हमारा पहला assumption ये है कि that there is some universal social laws. So there always will be subjectivity and sometimes forceful finding of patterns will be there. जहाँ नहीं मिले वहाँ लगा दो. So remember Derrida, logocentrism. We are logocentric people. So wherever required, or even if we do not find some logic, we create one and impose it upon that particular data. Okay, so just like this. Subjectivity and values. The claim of value neutrality is criticized as unrealistic. Since all research is influenced by researchers' subjective bias, assumptions, and cultural upbringing. Second, it neglects qualitative data. मतलब quantitative data ज़्यादा focus करेगा rather than focusing upon the qualitative data. Qualitative data and quantitative data, that means qualitative data is experiences, emotions, individual level पे बात करना. Okay, quantitative data is data of mass. Everybody behaves like this, everybody behaves like that. It's more like a quantitative data. So talking about the group of the people, some general behaviors, rather than individual level पे discussing that. So why interview? Suppose if I interview each and every one of you, I come up with a qualitative data. Say every child in my class. So basically, I have a one-to-one interaction with every one of you, and then I talk about that this guy, he has his own set of problems. This guy, she has her own set of problems, and everybody has their own set of problems because of their past experiences. Okay, that is one way that I can generate qualitative data about this class. But then what I do is some general idea about the class. Okay, so for example, there will be a test. Everybody will be writing the same test, and then based on that test score, I see the average. So if the average is say above a particular threshold, I'll say that the class is doing good, and the average is below a particular threshold, I'll say that the class is performing very poorly. Okay, that is the quantitative data. Okay, here individual problems will be neglected because everybody is given the same test. Everybody is given to write the same type of answers, and based on that, and just now some person will be having different kind of problem. One might be having problem of time management. One might be having a problem of content. The other might be having a problem of structuring the question. The fourth might be having a problem of recalling the content. The fifth might be having a problem of choice of the questions. Okay, अपनी अपनी problems हैं. किसी को English में problem, किसी को scholar के नाम नहीं याद आते. Okay, so there are different problems that each and everybody will be struggling, and that can be only analyzed through qualitative data. But when my tendency in itself is to generalize, I will not be focusing upon the qualitative data. My focus will be on quantitative data. That is talking about the data at the mass level, general data that actually represents the entire population rather than specific individuals. Are you getting this? So it rejects the qualitative data. Just like this. Positivist approach neglects the richness of qualitative data. Limiting the understanding of social experiences, subjective interpretation, and cultural context. Next one, it's just related to this. It disregards social construction of reality. By assuming social phenomena similar to natural phenomena. Okay. Here what it's trying to say that any kind of social reality that we do is basically based on social interactions, the context, the situation, the timing, the person involved, the sentiments of that person involved, the psychology of that person involved. Okay, the situations, isn't it? That is creating that social reality. Not every student say I am related to each one of you in the same capacity as a person who shares his knowledge of anthropology. Okay, now but my interaction with each and every student is different, and in different contexts my interaction will also become different. So there are some students who are relatively introvert. They basically feel that teacher se kya baat karna, or they do not dare or gather some courage to talk to me. They might have a lot of questions in their mind, but they believe that somebody will ask on their behalf. And then there are people who basically have a lot of questions, and that comes the question they do not think and they speak it out. Okay, wo bhi hai. So they basically do not have. So basically, each and every student will have a different kind of relationship with me. Now the teacher-student relationship is not general; it's different with respect to each one of you. Many of you in the entire 6 months will not have a single word interaction with me, and this is not something in general. I'm talking about in general. So if there are 100 students in my class, so there will be 10 who will be engaging almost every day for 6 months, and there will be say 10 who never had a single word with me. Never ever will have a single word with me. They'll come, they will take the classes, even if they get selected also. But I will so, hence, the entire social structure that is between you and me cannot be generalized. That every time it's not the same. Okay, that is the teacher-student, but the relationship is not the same. It's a aspect of that context. The individual involved in that relationship actually is creating that social reality. सबके साथ same relation होता, but it's not like that. But since it is trying to talk about some general idea, it will be ignoring or discounting the variability of individuals. Okay, so it will disregard the social construction of reality. And the last one, right? There is a limitation in studying complex socio-cultural phenomena. Limitation in studying complex socio-cultural phenomena, which requires a more nuanced and interpretive approach. Okay. Next comes the micro approach. Now, micro, as the macro focuses upon the general idea, some universalistic ideas. Okay, micro basically does not discount the individual, but rather is concerned about the individual in the interactions of the social cultural phenomena. Okay, so they basically say that the individual do have consciousness, and any activity that an individual is doing basically is not determined by the structure that he is a part of. Yes, structure plays a role, but usme bhi variability is there based on individual to individual, say individual social experiences. As I told you that the structure is teacher-student, but every individual is not behaving exactly the same. The individuals are behaving in a very different manner. That means individuals do have some kind of consciousness, and that is determining their behavior rather than just being a part of the structure, everybody behaving exactly the same. School may be structured. So does all the students, although the rule was applied to all, but was everybody behaving in the same manner? There are some students who completely obliged to the rules of the school. They come on time, have a polished shoe, and they are the ones then who will always be expelled from the class. Who regularly, they are the ones who are the kind of deviants, and then there are the ones who are mediocres, average. Okay, and they basically neither are punished, nor basically are doing some kind of extraordinary work to be recognized. They are the ones who remain anonymous throughout the school life. So that is what actually used to happen. Okay, so everybody is behaving differently with their own consciousness. Okay, and here the micro approach will be taking into that individual consciousness. Okay, and if you remember, it's just like the difference between social fact versus social action. by Max Weber, social fact by Durkheim. Okay, so fact was something that is the macro approach. Okay, that being a part of the society, way of acting, thinking, behaving that every individual follows, that has an element of coercion attached to it. Don't do so, there will be punishments, and based on that, everybody behaves accordingly. Social action says that the individual is not a matter or not a matter that can be pushed or pulled by the force, but has his own consciousness, and he uses that consciousness while deciding his or her action. Okay, social action. So this micro approach will be talking about this, and that's why it has a strand called as non-positivism. Okay, so non-positivism basically has certain features. For example, first, it focuses upon the qualitative data because it is focusing upon the individual's experiences, individual's consciousness. So it focuses upon qualitative data, the person-to-person interaction, participant observation, Verstehen. Remember Verstehen? Okay, stepping into the shoes of that, the theory of mind, and so on and so forth. That is the qualitative data. Then it actually includes subjectivity and interpretation. After all, the researcher in itself also is an individual, and when he is doing that research, he cannot be free from all the opinions and all the biases. So there will be some subjectivity that will be included when some individual is studying some other individual. So if you want to understand, say, ek tarika ye hai ki I, being the researcher, is studying you as the one who is observed. But at the same time, I am also, or my actions can also be studied in this context, based on my cultural biases, my cultural context, my cultural upbringing, and that will bring subjectivity in my research book also. So if you study my actions, while studying these group of people, you'll find that my actions are also based on some cultural upbringing. For example, my behavior in this class is based on the experiences that I had with respect to the earlier batches. Okay, so whatever I do, whatever changes I bring in the upcoming batches will be based on my previous experiences, something that experience that was considered to be good or had a positive, say, appreciation. I'll definitely try to inculcate that practice, and something that was not very much liked by the student, I try to remove it. Okay, so based on that, my experiences are also basically changing with respect to you, or my activities are also changing with respect to you. I'm also not same with respect to every batch. Okay, so this is the case of subjectivity and interpretation. Then the third one, it's just the continuity of it, reflexivity and positionality. Okay, so we have discussed this. What is reflexivity? What is reflexivity? Acknowledgement of self-subjectivity. Okay, so if they're promoting that the research can never be objective, there has to be an element of subjectivity. One should acknowledge this subjectivity. That is called as reflexivism. That the researcher should acknowledge one's subjectivity while he or she was conducting that research, and not just that subjectivity, how that subjectivity has impacted his research, and then reevaluate that research based on, or reevaluating that finding. So if you remember that flowchart, so what the baggage you had, what the kind of thinking that you have while you're conducting that research, and how this baggage and thinking might have affected your research, reevaluate your finding, and then the process goes on. So that reflexivity is very much important. Okay, and then positionality. Positionality means what position that you held while doing that research. आप गए होगे तो कुछ सोच के गए हो. ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आप randomly चले गए कि चलो देखते हैं यार क्या होता है research. It never happens like this. There is always a positionality. You have, or every person has some kind of position. For example, there will be a woman who is going for research. She will be positioned more for women rights, okay, or female rights, equality of women. Definitely, many people will not. So being a woman entering into an area that is dominated by men, definitely women do have some kind of positions. Or coming from a society, say Germany, Germany side, and you have just experienced the fall of dictatorship or Nazi government. In such case, if you have experienced the fall of Nazi government or a dictatorial rule, you definitely will have a more favorable bias towards democracy and a hatred towards dictatorial rule, isn't it? अब हो सकता है कि कहीं जगह पे dictatorial might be doing good for the people. Okay, for example, let's take the case of Iraq. Okay, Iraq, Saddam Hussein rule was considered to be a dictatorial rule. But what happened after the fall of Saddam Hussein? The society is completely in chaos, and it's been around 2 decades, and nothing has come to normal. What was the case? Iraq was a thriving economy under the rule of Saddam Hussein, but then a dictatorial, just labeling it as a dictatorial rule, and then collapsing the government, and finally everything collapsed. Okay, now what actually happens? It is dictatorial is good or bad has to be seen with respect to the context. So हर जगह पे अलग-अलग होगा. But here, your positionality will actually see it in certain way, but acknowledge that position, what you actually had when you were doing that research, and that will make your research not bias-free, but at least it will make it more acceptable, more inclusive in nature, because you are accepting that my opinions has certain limitations, and that's why other opinions are also welcome. It's not the absolute truth. Okay, so that is reflexivity and positionality. So these are some of the, or another one, the last one, that is contextual understanding. So understanding it with respect to that context, that particular situation, rather than some general ideas. Okay, so just like this micro approach. The approach emphasizes upon the role of individuals. The role of individuals. It does not mean that. It does not mean that they reject structures altogether. They reject structures altogether. However, they place more importance. They place more importance to the role of individuals, to the role of individuals, and the context. And the context. Individuals are portrayed not as passive robots, but as active players. Right, the heading non-positivism. Non-positivism argues that society is not governed by some general universal laws. Not governed by some general universal laws, but by the meaning and motive, of individuals, in particular context. It argues that human behavior and social reality cannot be fully understood through objective and value free methods or positivist methods. Objective or value free methods or positivist methods. Right? Key features. First one, subjectivity and interpretation. Right? It recognizes human behavior and social reality are shaped by subjective interpretations and meanings. Second, contextual understanding. Social phenomena cannot be separated from their historical and cultural context. Next, qualitative methods and data. It favors qualitative methods of data collection. Like case studies, participant observation, ethno-linguistics, etc. Last one, reflexivity and positionality. Non-positivism recognizes the role of researcher in shaping the research process and the outcomes. It encourages reflexivity, where researcher examine their own bias and assumptions. Okay. Now the criticism of this method, non-positivism. Here the major criticism is that theory नहीं बना पाएंगे, lack of generalizability. Okay, in that case theory making is not possible. Okay, and some general understanding, but rather what we'll be doing is we end up collecting data for multiple cultures and all that kind of thing, or हर situation को. So for example, like the postmodernist idea of eclecticism. So whatever is valid, wherever it is valid, आप उसको use करो. Okay, so lack of generalizability. I'm not going to repeat this, just like this, lack of generalizability. Then the other one is lack of objectivity, because they themselves are promoting subjective opinion, subjective emotion, subjective understanding of a particular cultural phenomenon. They're not objective. Okay, but the problem is ये खुद ही बोल रहे हैं कि objectivity possible नहीं है. So how can somebody be objective? But objectivity possible नहीं है. Okay, agreed. But that doesn't mean we should altogether reject objectivity. That since it's not possible, we should not even try to become objective. Okay, now that is the major problem. That once they have understood that since the research is being done by a human who is a social animal, definitely there will be some kind of subjective opinion. Agreed. But at least we should strive towards becoming objective, more and more objective. That's not the case here. Since objectivity is not possible, they have altogether rejected objectivity and they favored subjective हो जाए, जितने मर्जी subjective हो सकते हो. Okay, so the lack of objectivity. Then the third one is overemphasis on qualitative data. Okay, so the problem is overemphasis on qualitative data is it's actually rejecting the merits or importance of quantitative data. For example, if I keep on thinking that I will interact with each and every student in order to understand their problem, and then I'll come up with a solution. The problem is nobody is going to benefit out of it, because if there are 100 students and I give 10 minutes a day to each and every student, in that case 1,000 minutes per day will be spent interacting with the students only, and that 10 minutes is not enough to mentor a student also. What I will do is, अब मैं कोई एक ऐसी strategy तो बना ही नहीं पाऊंगा जो सबको suit करे, because everybody is having their own problems, because I'm relying more on qualitative data. Now if I rely on quantitative data and find that majority of the people, they basically are not having a problem in the content, because the content is what they are getting from the class itself. Okay, the major problem is to recall the content and to structure the content, and based on that I tell you some tricks, I give you some tips that can help you recall, that can help you structure the content in a better manner. I'm not saying 100% will benefit, but at least majority will benefit. But that solution is coming to me not based on one-to-one interaction with each and every student, but that is coming to me based on some general idea of the student. This is the problem that majority are facing. Okay, so that's why quantitative data is also very important. So for example, you will be posted in, say, in a district. Okay, welfare of a district can happen in two ways. One is based on your quantitative data you act. Okay, and based on qualitative data you act. But if you say you act on the qualitative data, of the government machinery starts acting on the qualitative data, आप पूरे district में एक आदमी का भला नहीं कर पाओगे. Okay, that is the problem. You will not be able to benefit even a single family also, because when you talk about a single family, you will require some amount of time to invest there, to understand their problem, come up with a solution, and that solution will also take some amount of time in order to show its true results, isn't it? But तब तक आपका आंसर हो जाएगा. till the time you understand the data, then come up with a solution, help them solve that problem, that at that point of time you will transfer in another district. And पूरी जिंदगी बीत जाएगी, आप एक भी परिवार का भला नहीं कर पाओगे. The qualitative data. Okay, but quantitative data, you are facing that majority of the people in this district basically have poor literacy, or maybe might be not be included financially, or maybe housing problem. That might not be the problem of all, but housing problem. Okay, बहुत सारे homeless हैं, या फिर कोई major health issue है, maybe some disease is high in high frequency, HIV is very much in high frequency. So that is quantitative data is basically giving you some kind of idea that can actually help you at least take some steps rather than waiting for qualitative data. नहीं, मैं पूरे गांव सब गांव से बात करूंगा तब जाके मैं एक solution लेके आऊंगा, तो फिर तो हो जाएगा, फिर तो होगा ही नहीं, means your entire journey will be spent in collecting this qualitative data and no ground impact will be seen in your tenure at all in any of the districts. Okay, so that is the thing, that overemphasizing upon the qualitative data will actually lead to negligence of the merits of quantitative data. Just like this, ये वाला आपने लिखा होगा that it leads to overlooking the merits of quantitative data. So these are the criticism. Now, one very favorite question of UPSC that it has been asking last 3-4 साल से 2 बार, that is one of the non-positivist method called as or approach called as phenomenology. Okay, so what is phenomenology? It simply means the study of lived experiences. Okay, study of lived experiences or study of phenomena. So what you were doing is studying phenomena, अभी तक positivism में, but what you will do is you will be studying the lived experience of the people who were actually experiencing this phenomenon on a day-to-day basis, rather than not what you see about that phenomena, but what the people who are actually creating this phenomena, who are actually experiencing this phenomenon on a day-to-day basis, what do they think about this phenomenon? That is the lived experience. This is phenomenology. Now, phenomenology was used in anthropology mainly from symbolic approach, lived experiences, Verstehen, hermeneutics, and thick description, just to understand the lived experiences of people living in the society and how do they perceive certain symbols. Okay, again, cognitive approach. That also talks about the lived experiences, the same forest, the same bamboos, the same cattle, how they are being perceived by other group of people and how they are perceived by us, differential understandings of it. Okay, the study of lived experiences or how the perceptions vary from culture to culture. That is phenomenology. Okay, so here, rather than trying to understand or trying to give a theory, what we'll try to understand that how different people, different group of people, they have different perception of the outer world, or how do they have different perception of the same experiences. This is what is phenomenology. Okay, and it was used by, or Clifford Geertz was influenced by it, Conklin, Tyler was influenced by it, and postmoderns, they were very much influenced by the idea of phenomenology, trying to understand the society as they perceive the world rather than trying to understand it from a general theory or general ideas. Okay, so phenomenology. अब postmodernism is phenomenology at an individual level, mass level की बात छोड़ो. They are talking about phenomenology at the individual level because every individual is unique in itself and every individual is having their own perceptions based on their own understanding of the world, based on the information that is being put on in them, say by their unique experiences. तो हर किसी की perception अलग है, and that's why एक general theory तो दी ही नहीं जा सकती. And that is what is phenomenology. Okay, so phenomenology basically talks about one phenomena called as, or one mechanism called as bracketing off, or simply bracketing. So it says that individuals should bracket them, or at least acknowledge. Bracket means that they should shed off all their preconceived notion and all such kind of biases. Extreme relativism को follow करना चाहिए. Okay, that is bracket off. That any kind of emotions that are attached to the individual, they should be shedding it off. Any kind of preconceived notion, shed it off, bracket off. No ranking, nothing of understanding, no backwardness, no progressiveness, nothing of that sort. And what then remains is what is called as phenomenological residue. That means once you bracket off all those experiences, all those emotions, all those subjective opinions, the पुराने notions, then what you will be left with is what is called as the phenomenological residue of a particular phenomenon. Okay, that means since you are not having any kind of preconceived theories, I am just understanding your opinion from your point of view rather than trying to give a general theoretical orientation to it. Or it simply can be understood as the process of stepping into the shoes of the actor. So when you are stepping into the shoes of the actor, if you remember the 3 steps, the first one, identify the choices and the constraints of that actor. Okay, then interact or develop same wavelength with respect to the actor, and then third one, interact with the actor. Okay, so when you are understanding the choices and the constraint and develop the same wavelength, at that point of time you have bracketed off, means you have just forgotten your identity. You are none other than that actor himself. You have understood the idea of or the perception of that actor himself. आप खुद वो नहीं हो. You are now in the shoes of that actor, or theory of mind. That is when you are stepping into the shoes of the person with whom you are interacting. तो उस समय आप क्या सोच रहे हो, आप वो नहीं सोच रहे. What the other person is perceiving, you are thinking that while you are stepping into the shoes of that actor. Okay, so if you remember, I gave you a quote, Cooley, that I'm not what I think I am. I am not what you think I am. I am what I think you think I am. Okay, so that is I am stepping into your mind and trying to understand what you think about me. Okay, based on what I think you think about me will generate my actions or subsequent reaction towards your behavior, because I'm thinking that you're thinking in such a way. So for example, it's very easy actually to explain this. So suppose if you think that the group thinks that you're humorous, बहुत funny आदमी है. Okay, now group is thinking like that. You have a perception that people believe that you are funny. So in that case, because you think they're thinking that you're funny, you will, whenever you will go into that group, you will try to act funny. You'll always try to crack jokes, although you may or may not be that funny at all. But because that pressure that you believe that they are thinking that he is funny, maybe हो सकता है कि एक बार आप कहीं मिले होगे and you must have put up some words or you have spoken something randomly that might have made them laugh. ठीक है, हंस दिया होगा. अब उनके बाद उनको शायद ये लगने लगा होगा कि आप फनी हो, और या फिर आप ऐसा सोचते हो, उनको लगता है कि आप फनी. And just because you think like that, you act accordingly. अब हर बार जाओगे तो आपका परफॉर्मेंस प्रेशर होगा, कई बार आप जोक रट के लेके जाओगे कि अभी जाना है, वो सोचेंगे फनी आज फनी एक्ट क्यों नहीं कर रहा है, then I'll have to act funny. So this is, you are stepping into the mind of the person and thinking what they think about you, and that is how your perception is actually being created. Okay, we'll talk about this more when we'll be seeing in Unit 2.2, that is resocialization and such thing. So Goffman, his idea of dramaturgy, okay, dramaturgy, sorry. So he says that we are just the actors on the stage with mask on our faces. हमारे चेहरे पे मास्क है हमेशा, and हम कभी रियल सेल्फ होते नहीं. We are always masking ourselves. तो अभी मेरे ऊपर मास्क है एक टीचर का. Okay, just the moment I step out of this class, I might be interacting with somebody else with another mask on my face. Okay, then a third mask, and then every day I'm acting with multiple masks on my faces. When I'm acting with my father, I'm acting with a mask of a son. I'm acting with a mask of a brother. I'm acting with a mask of a husband, and so on and so forth. So every time I have a different mask on my face, and that basically is what I am at that point of time. हमारे चेहरे पे मास्क हमेशा ड्रामेटर्जी. So मतलब हम थिएटर्स पे हैं, ड्रामा कर रहे हैं, अलग अलग रोल्स में परफॉर्म करते हैं. आज अभी इस समय मैं टीचर का रोल परफॉर्म कर रहा हूं, and you are acting like a student. Okay, but it's true, isn't it? You're acting with a mask of a student. अब कुछ ऐसी बातें हैं हम सब में. Okay, for example, if you see my mask, see my identity as a friend of somebody, maybe an engineering college student too, so you will have that mask will not match with this mask. Okay, that being a teacher, civil services के बारे में पढ़ाता है. So my friend, they were very much kind of shocked when they got to know that मेरे कॉलेज में एक अच्छी कंपनी में जॉब लगी थी, नेस्ले में. फिर अच्छे very good package मतलब देते थे, and that's हमारी ब्रांच में सबसे टॉप कंपनी मानी जाती है, नेस्ले. So getting into Nestle, everybody was not surprised, shocked. इसकी कैसे लगी? So they have their own conspiracy theories that I got to know कि जुगाड़ लगा होगा. Then they were even more shocked when I left that job in a very short span of time. एक यहाँ पे लग नहीं रही थी लोगों की, and मेरी लग के फिर मैंने छोड़ दी. And then क्यों छोड़ी? सिविल सर्विसेज के लिए. They were like, ये क्लास तो आते ने कहा he prepared for civil services exam. And then one very famous incident, well आपके लिए famous नहीं है. It's famous for me in my college because my college topper in that year who got 88 something percentage, and I hardly managed to pass my exams. So she and me both prepared for civil services first attempt, and she was preparing from the very first year, but she could not qualify prelims in the first attempt, and I prepared for 6 months, I qualified prelims. And she was like, ये कैसा हो गया? So remember, miracles can happen. Okay, don't worry. मतलब सच में आप यहाँ पे सब लोग बराबर हो, पुराने जितने पाप किए सब खत्म. UPSC is altogether सबको एकदम एक सेम लेवल पे लाके खड़ा कर देता है. Doesn't matter that which college you come from, which background you come from, have you read during your graduation or not, doesn't matter. Everybody is at the same pedestal level. Doesn't matter आपने क्या किया है पास में, बस consistency here. You can actually. So that happened, and then after all, when I went for interviews, I appeared for 2 interviews, and subsequently आगे जाके अब वो तो और ही परेशान हो जा रही है कि बार इसका इंटरव्यू कैसे पहुंच गया. And then after finally I decided कि टीचर बन जाऊंगा. तो मेरे दोस्त भी परेशान हो गए. जब ये टीचर बनेगा means he has never been to class. Actually, what used to happen was after before every semester when the admit card was to be given, I used to stand in front of my department for requesting कि मेरा attendance थोड़ा कम है. So please allow me to give that exam. Okay, so then becoming a teacher, just opposite role. So the thing is, every time they have expected me with say something. So that I'm telling that कि मेरा mask as a teacher and मेरा mask as a college student is completely contradictory to each other. Okay, completely contradictory. And we have all these kind of personalities. It's not that who really I am, but that is my truth or this is my truth. We do not know. Basically, these are two different masks on my faces. Okay, and today's mask is different from tomorrow's mask or some other contextual mask. Okay, so that is what dramaturgy says. यहाँ पे immediate subjectivity आ गई. When you are studying the person with respect to this, Irving Goffman's idea of dramaturgy, it's completely different from say general idea of personality. That there is some special genius and the person acts in that manner or this manner. कोई correlation ही नहीं है. आप अपने बारे में सोचो. Being a son, or how you behave and how you behave to your friend, how you behave in the class, बहुत अलग ही अलग दुनिया है. घर के अपने पापा के सामने आप एकदम संस्कारी. Okay, so that kind of person, and now in the class you are like अलग ही zone में रहते हो सब लोग. So that is the mask on your faces. Okay, so this is the case of phenomenology, wherein you basically are emphasizing upon the lived experience of a particular phenomena, and that always will be subjective. That can never be objective. That can never be universally explained by any single phenomena, but rather is always subjective and contextual in nature. That is phenomenology. And the examples in anthropology is the symbolic school, the cognitive approach. Now we'll be seeing some other examples, but before that, just write this. What is phenomenology? Thinking about what other things and acting based on it isn't a preconceived notion. नहीं आप इंटरेक्शन में तो ऐसे ही तो करते हो. It's not a preconceived notion. When I'm speaking something, suppose if I keep on explaining this, अभी जैसे मैं अपने कॉलेज के बारे में बता रहा हूँ. ना मैंने 2-4 लोगों का चेहरा देखा, if they are very serious, I believe that they are not receptive. Immediately I'll stop and I will continue with the matter. Okay, जो मेरे क्लास का मैटर, because I feel that ये सब सोचने क्या बकवास कर रहा है अपनी कॉलेज की बात बता रहा है. So it's not that you are saying this. It's something that I feel you are thinking about me, and based on that I will decide whether to continue, whether to just skip it there and just move forward. Okay, so every time I'm interacting with anyone, you think that what the other person is thinking about you, and based on that, or what the other person is actually thinking about what you spoke, and based on that you will be deciding whether to move ahead with that line of thought or just skip it and change the line of thought. Okay, just like this. Phenomenology is the study of lived experiences. Is the study of lived experiences. It's the study of phenomena. Study of phenomena that arises from the experience of being in the world. Experience from being in the world. It seeks to understand the outside world. Seeks to understand the outside world as it is interpreted by and through human consciousness. By and through human consciousness. Okay, right? It focuses on understanding subjective experiences and the ways an individual makes sense of the world. It aims to uncover underlying meanings, and essence of lived experiences. and a sense of lived experiences, comma, emphasizing on first person's perspective, emphasizing on first person's perspective, and importance of individual consciousness and perception. Individual consciousness and perception. Next point. To achieve deep understanding, researchers quarantine their personal judgments. Researchers quarantine their personal judgment. This is called as bracketing. Next point. What remains after bracketing is phenomenological residue. What remains after bracketing is phenomenological residue. Okay, next point. According to phenomenologists, social reality is human made and human experienced. It believes that individuals collectively create a social reality, comma, whose objects they designate and arrange in ways that makes sense to them. Okay, right. Phenomenologists do not focus upon giving general theories. And highlight the futility or uselessness of objective approach. In studying social phenomena. Okay, right. For example, Clifford Geertz used phenomenological method. Clifford Geertz used phenomenological methods to explore the symbolic meanings of, say, Balinese cockfight. Symbolic meanings of Balinese cockfight. Okay. Then cognitive scholars like Harold Conklin, they use phenomenological method to understand the perception of outer world by Hanunus. You can explain or elaborate this depending upon the marks of the question. If there is 20 marks, you can elaborate these studies. There is another scholar. So the name of the scholar is Drew Leder. So I'll talk about it. So he says he actually is a medical anthropologist. So he used phenomenology just to understand the approach or say understanding of illnesses or disease. Okay. Ab jaise ki there is a disease as if it's a universal biomedical deviance. So for example, you have a high BP. So if there is high BP, so anywhere in the world, a blood pressure above a certain level will be considered to be a high blood pressure, be it in India, be it in America. But how do you perceive this high blood pressure? In this society and in the other society is different. So illness is something that is culturally perceived. And there are certain culture-specific syndromes. For example, homosexuality can be considered as an illness in our society. Or इसके कोई अगर बच्चा अपने पेरेंट्स को बोलेगा I'm homosexual, immediately he'll take him to a doctor. The doctor says it's normal, then he'll take him to a hakim or something like that. We'll try to give some kind of medicine or something like that to treat this abnormality because it is considered to be an abnormal behavior, hence a illness. So diseases, they are universal biomedical deviances, and that's why the criteria to understand the disease is worldwide the same. But illness, it's a cultural specified syndromes, and that's why it will be perceived differently in different societies. Now, one very good example, we'll see this in epidemiology also, that Japanese people, okay, they have a perception that talks about the fullness of the body, or say that they respect the wholeness of their body. And due to which they do not go for organ transplant. उनको लगता है कि if they want to be reborn as a human, then their body should remain intact. So they do not even allow piercings. And that's why Japanese samurais, when they used to kill their enemy, they used to behead them. Okay, why? Basically, beheading means the ultimate form of mutilation of the body. That means no chance of being reborn as a human again. That is the beheading. And that's why Japanese people, they do not persuade or they do not allow for organ transplant. Not there is a donor, not there is somebody who is an acceptor. Because everybody wants to be a reborn as a human. And that's why organ transplant Japan में नहीं होता. बहुत कम है. Because of their idea of wholeness of body that has to be perceived or preserved. Sorry. Okay, so Drew Leder, just like this. Drew Leder, a medical anthropologist used phenomenology to understand lived experiences of illness. He explores how individuals make sense of their bodies and health related experiences in diverse cultural and social contexts. Okay, another one is a study, Homecoming of War Veteran by Travis Martin. Now, this study is also related to phenomenological experiences of the soldiers who are coming from war-prone zones, maybe Afghanistan, maybe Iraq, maybe from Korea. Okay, and the phenomenological study was used to understand experiences of each and everyone, because everyone experienced the same bloodshed. Okay, and a lot of dead bodies, a lot of deaths around them, a lot of people killed, their colleagues being killed. Okay, and they being surrounded by the blood, the organs of the body, and of the enemies, of the children, of their colleagues, and they have their own individual traumas, and they have their own kind of dreams, they have their own kind of experiences, they have their own kind of threats and bodily experiences, and that's why phenomenology, to understand their experiences of coming from the war-prone zone and then to come up with some kind of solutions for them. Okay, just like this, Homecoming of War Veteran by Travis Martin. Martin observes that when a soldier comes home, he or she encounters a reality that is characterized by anomie. That is hyphen, right? Shift in the norms, characterized by anomie, shift in the norms created during his or her absence. पहले किसी और तरीके से जीते थे, अलग तरीके से जीते. The rules are not the same. The way of life is not the same. Shift in the norms created during his or her absence. Okay. Next point. More than 31% of US soldiers returning from Iraq, Afghanistan had major depression, traumatic stress, and mental disorders. Okay. Martin used phenomenological studies to study the experiences of the soldiers coming back from the battlegrounds. Okay, so we'll continue from this in the next class. That's it for today. Thank you so much.